The FTF podcast lay in excitement, and it was an excitement in 3 parts. The most obvious part was the excitement of a new buddy read, one of The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Hosting this podcast are longtime friends Charles and Dylan. This is their first time that they are discussing this book, and their anticipation added to the excitement. Then there's you, the listener. This podcast is for you, just as the third part is yours. This is appropriate, as it is hopefully the greatest excitement of the three, wrapping the others inside itself. Welcome, everybody.
Can you hear my snapping?
Zoom is kind of cutting out the snapping. No, I can't really hear it, but I can see it.
Okay, I snapped. Hopefully the listeners can hear it, because that was beautiful, Charles.
Thank you. I was so excited and so moved by Patrick's words that I wanted to pay some homage and get the show off right.
Yeah, and homage was paid.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everybody, to the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. As we said in the intro, this is a very exciting day. We kick off our second buddy read series, starting with The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss.
And I'm looking forward to getting into this with you, my buddy, Charles.
I'm looking forward to getting into it as well. I mean, should we just not waste any time and get right into this?
Why waste any time? I think that that tripartite excitement, Charles,
Yes.
is just knocking on the door, and I think it might just bust it down. So let's just get into this.
Let's do it. So, would you like to introduce The Name of the Wind?
Yeah, we're going to break our pattern here by having me read the intro.
Well, you did a
Are you
great
ready?
job writing it, so let's hear it.
Oh, thanks, Charles. Kvothe, a legendary figure who is more myth than man by this point, is in hiding posing as an innkeeper named Kvothe. He relays his story to two people, a chronicler who has tracked him down, and Kvothe's pupil, Bast. Kvothe tells the first third of his story, including his childhood, attending the university, and a trip to the town of Trebon that results in the city being burned to the ground.
Beautiful, beautiful. This is exciting, man. How do we even jump into this?
I mean, I think that the first thing that comes to mind for me as someone who I've read this series already, but I'm sitting here virtually with a person who has yet to read the series before, which means I'm just looking forward to hearing from you, Charles. I mean, we've tried to avoid talking about this book the entire time so we could get the authentic reaction on
Yes, this is a long time
podcast.
coming. You listeners may know from the Friends Pitching Fantasy episode when this was selected that this is one of Marsha's favorites, one of the modern fantasy world's favorites that I have never read. I went in completely cold into this series, so I guess I'll kick it off with my first impressions. And what I have to say is I was really excited, and I was super thrilled with my experience. The prose of Patrick Rothfuss just pulled me in right away with that, that silence of 3 parts that kind of pulled me in and stuck with my brain enough that I had to replicate it at the beginning of the podcast. But such this beautiful descriptive language that sets the tone for the setting and the voice of the characters. Was truly masterful in that respect. And coming off of Mistborn, which was very, I would say, plot heavy, structure heavy, to have something that's more like prose and character heavy was very refreshing. And to come into something new and just reading it as a first time reader was also very refreshing as well. So I had a great time going through it.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that. I obviously had to put on my marketing cap to try to pitch this to you, Charles, and you know that that cap fits you a lot better than it fits me. But
Yes.
I found a way to get it on, and I tried to sell this best I could. So I'm happy to hear that you've really enjoyed it that much. And
It
I
was on my
also,
reading list for a long time. As we know from the Pitching Fantasy episode, I never got into it because the series wasn't finished. But I think having the podcast and a format where we can record our conversation, and it's such a popular series, I was more than happy to jump into it. And it didn't take much selling on your part, but what you did was excellent, and it was all I needed to choose it.
well, I'm glad you did jump in. I think that something that came to mind for me after reading Mistborn, which we had an awesome time with,
Yes.
and then getting into the Kingkiller Chronicle, is I felt like this phrase almost kept coming up for me, which is that Mistborn was about the destination, but Kingkiller is about the journey, and I think
It's
that's
so true.
why I felt like it was easier for us to just dive into something that isn't finished yet, because it's not really about, at least for me anyway, it's not really about where it will end up. It's more about how enjoyable a process it is just living in Rothfuss's world, which is conveyed to you through that absolutely beautiful prose. Like,
Yes.
each sentence is so perfectly crafted. And I thought, look, this can end up wherever it ends up in the third book, but it's it's an enjoyable process regardless of where it does end up.
Right. I mean, then it's so what you said was so true. The Name of the Wind is very much about the journey. I remember I was reading it on a Kindle, and I just noticed that it tells you how far into the book you are. And I noticed I was like 90% in, and I was like, "Where's the rising action? Where's the Sanderlanche, if you will?" But it didn't even matter. It was just you're in this guy's mind. He's telling his story, and I was along for the ride. I didn't feel like I needed that typical tight structure of like rising action, climax, falling action. I just needed to continue to hear his story, and it did get exciting at parts towards the end, but not in like a plotted, formatted way like we were used to coming in from Sanderson. So very much about the journey, and if you're going to write a book that's about the experience and the journey, to complement it with his writing style that's very prose heavy, very thoughtful, very insightful, lots of very unique metaphors and turns of phrases that not only are descriptive and sound great, but explain so much. It's like this silence in three parts. It explains so much of what's going on at that inn in the beginning that you're right away, you understand kind of what the headspaces of all of these characters in the setting within 2 pages. So I was just enjoying the experience and taking it in paragraph by paragraph. So it was a very nice change of pace, and I was very impressed with it.
Well, I think you approached it with the right perspective to enjoy this book. And I feel like when people miss the mark on this book, and maybe we'll get into some of that in our review of the reviews episode
I
coming
think
up.
we will.
Uh, when people miss the mark on this, or maybe I should say, when people just don't enjoy it as much, it's because they're looking for that more typical story structure you're looking for. And I think if you're willing to just let Rothfuss tell you an amazing story, then you're probably going to be in for a good time.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, if Sanderson does such a good job of looking out for the reader and making sure that every book is its contained experience with payoffs and build up and exciting action, but Rothfuss is painting a picture basically. He's doing such a good job of fleshing out this story and this character, and he's taking his time with it, and he makes points throughout it not to follow like a specific any kind of specific format of storytelling. He's just kind of walking you through what's happening through the eyes of the character, which is, he's so great at being able to change voices, and it's just a very pleasant experience overall. I think we should just jump right into Patrick's Patrick Rothfuss's use of voice in this book, because when you have a book that's so much about storytelling, and you have a book that's so much about performance and myths and legends, and the point of view is basically three, like the whole story is three men sitting at a table and one of them telling his life story. The use of voice in this book is, in my opinion, masterful.
Yeah, I think I want to get into more about voice, and I'm curious what you're bringing there. I want to say too that I love that you mentioned that he intentionally goes against what we'd expect in a lot of typical story structure, and there's a lot of awareness that's displayed, particularly by Kvothe in the frame story, where he's very aware he's telling a story, where he is trying to say, hey, this is my actual life. This isn't
Right.
some story that's just going to neatly follow exactly what you think it should be. And
Right.
there's a part where Chronicler asks him, or basically Chronicler and Bast are talking to him about what would happen next. And Kvothe is saying, yeah, like if this were a story, right after, and I guess I should say spoilers, but the point of these episodes are to read the book and then come in and
Yes.
hear us discuss it, so that's taken for granted to some extent. So Quothe's parents end up getting killed in the story he's telling, and then they're asking him what's going to happen next, all this stuff about getting vengeance against the Chandrian, and Chronicler says, hey, yeah, if this were a story, then you'd train up and then you'd just go out and you'd kill them. And Kvothe describes it as clean, quick, and easy as lying. We know how it ends practically before it starts. That's why stories appeal to us. They give us the clarity and simplicity our real lives lack. And so much of what Rothfuss and Kvothe, therefore, are trying to show is this isn't supposed to be a story. This is supposed to be an autobiography,
It's very
and
true.
or it isn't supposed to be a story in the typical sense. It's supposed to be a man's autobiography,
Right.
and through that, it like we're all people living lives. We know that our lives don't neatly follow the structure of rising action, climax, falling action, and so on.
Right. And I had made notes of that through my reading also, because not even in like the framing story does he mention that, but even when he's telling the story and there's moments that almost set themselves up to be tropes, Quoth, as the narrator, makes these specific moments to point out, like, yeah, if this was the trope, it would have played out this way, but it
Yeah.
played out this way. And one of the quotes that I had is there's a scene where I guess they're he's with Denna, and Denna's like, and he's like falling, and Denna like
I know
reaches
the one
out
you're
to
talking
like
about. Yeah.
grab him, and he was like, if this were some heroic ballad, I would tell you how she clasped my hand firmly and pulled me to safety. But the truth is, she got hold of my shirt with one hand while the other made a tight fist in my hair. So he's like, and he does this multiple times throughout the book, where he's like, yeah, I could tell you that we we squared off, and I beat him in this epic moment, and it was so great, but it didn't play out like that. So anytime you, as a seasoned reader, see these like plots being set up, most books will like set them up and play around with them and like leave you hanging for a while before they resolve. But Quoth makes a point to say, I know what you're thinking, that this might happen this way, but it didn't. It happened in a much more mundane, uninteresting way. And that happened multiple times throughout the book. So while we're talking about that kind of setting of expectations and the use of storytelling as a way to forego some more traditional structure, was really well done in this book.
I totally agree. And I was also noticing those moments, and the one that stuck out to me most too was that one with Denna. Yeah, I I grabbed a couple other quotes that I found were pretty interesting. I'm wondering if you have any. It sounds like you wrote some down too.
Oh yeah, I have a whole thing of quotes, and because the best part of reading the series was um, reading Patrick's prose, I just I highlighted a whole bunch, and I went back and basically made a catalog of some of my favorites. So we'll see what comes up. But yeah, absolutely, I got tons.
Yeah, well, I'll tell another one that fits with this theme of stories. I think this whole thing, this whole novel, is a story about someone telling a story that is about stories, basically.
Yes.
And uh, there's, I mean, throughout the frame story and the actual retelling of Quoth's life, there are all these opportunities where not just Quoth, but others comment on the I all these ideas of storytelling. And I thought that one that was really interesting as almost a counterpoint and balance to some of what Quoth actually says throughout with like those Denna moments and things like that, where he's saying, "Oh, if this were a story, it'd be like that." There's also a couple of quotes. One was from Quoth that he says, "The best lies about me are the ones I told,"
Yeah.
and there's another one from Scarpy that you have to be a bit of a liar to tell a story the right way. Too much truth confuses the facts. Too much honesty makes you sound insincere. And I thought this is so interesting because there's this push pull of Quoth as both someone who's trying to say, oh, yeah, no, it actually went down like this, even though the legends have it that way, but he's also dropping tons of lines and hints because obviously even the Scarpy quote is Quoth saying it.
Right.
He's dropping these lines throughout that pretty much show that Quoth is a storyteller who uh, doesn't let the facts get in the way of a good story, and it's a really interesting balancing act that Rothfuss plays here.
Absolutely. The whole idea of whose voice it is and the context in which they're telling it is never lost in this story, but it can go like you're explaining, it can go like three levels deep. It's Quoth telling a story about himself, and then he's explaining other people telling stories to him. So it's a story of him being told a story,
Mm-hmm.
and Patrick
And it's in a
changes the
novel, which is obviously a
yeah.
story.
So Patrick is changing the voice of the narrator to fit the moment and the context, and it's really interesting to read all of those different kinds of shifts in style and tone. One of the first ones for me that I loved was when Quoth was being told a story by Trappist, and
Mm-hmm.
and Trappist is not a storyteller. I think he mentioned like that's the only time he ever told a story. And as he's like, oh, a long time ago there was this person, or wait, was it before or after? Like the story kept stopping because he kept forgetting like points or the order of things, and he's like, no, wait, go back, it was this thing. Or he's like, oh, whatever, we'll say it was this. So it was so interesting. And then very shortly after that you get told a similar story from Scarpy,
Mm.
who's a
Yep.
professional storyteller, and he tells that beautiful tale that sets off, that like kind of inspires, like kind of wakes up Quoth and get him to leave this city and go to find the college. So it was so interesting to see all those different points of view and different storytelling styles, and all just about like what makes a good story, and how Patrick's able to go into the minds of each character to kind of change the voice so it feels like someone is literally sitting next to you, and he conveys a lot of personality through just how the story is being told, which is really impressive.
That's really well stated, Charles. It's all about how Rothfuss, through Kvothe, who has this Ademaru both theatrical training and theatrical mindset,
Mhm.
is jumping into all of these different characters within his own story and then putting on their voices.
Right.
And it's set up in a way where we're able to buy in because there's so much done for why Kvothe would be such a good storyteller, and it's
Right.
it's
I
just beautiful.
There's one scene where he's like studying at where Quoth is studying at the college, and he's with all his friends at the bar, and they're talking about Denna, and they're talking about like describing her, and Quoth is like, she can't be described, and one of his friends is like, bets he can describe her, and he's like, she had perfect ears. He made a delicate gesture with his hands, perfect little ears, like they were carved out of something. And then all his friends were laughing, and Quoth was laughing, and it was just one of those
Mm.
moments where it's like the use of storytelling to establish character. And it's funny because like in the same breath you read these amazing poetic metaphors and things, and then he's writing another character that has no skills in description, and he's trying to describe perfect ears that were carved, and it's like it was just a funny moment for me. And it was also a good scene where you feel like you're actually in the bar with your friends, and they're all laughing, and they're all making fun of him for saying like they're like, ears, why are you describing her ears? And he doubles down, he's like, ears are important, like you need good ears.
Doesn't Bast also mention her ears though?
I think that is Bast, is it not?
Oh, I thought maybe you were referring to because Bast and Chronicler obviously are
Oh
sitting
yes,
there
yes. So
and
they're not. So he's not in the tavern in college. They're in the Waystone
oh,
Inn.
okay.
Okay, that is the part I was confused. It was the Waystone Inn, and it was Bast. Yeah, but they were all having a good laugh at that, which I really enjoyed. That was a good character moment,
It
and good another
was,
good
yeah,
use of changing the narrator and changing the voice to establish character, which is so well done.
for sure. So also in that moment, there's another one of those hints that Quoth might not be as reliable a narrator as I guess some might hope. I don't know. And that's where Quoth is trying to say how perfect Denna is in every way. And then Bast, who has seen her once to know how perfect her ears are, of course, he says that Denna has had a crooked nose.
Yes, yes.
And I love that with and Bast also points out that all the women in quotes stories are described as so beautiful, and this is kind of our one moment to say, okay, the one person who another person in the room in the frame story has actually seen, it's like, oh yeah, like Bast thought she was attractive and had some features he was into, but he he also is like, okay, you can't tell me this person was like flawless in every way, like,
Right.
and I think that was a nice moment too.
Yeah, and then Quoth was like, "Yeah, it's indescribable. How do you describe beauty?" And so I thought it was, no, I thought that was a really funny moment, and just a great, just a great example of character, especially coming from Mistborn, also to have characters like have that natural, free flowing dialogue, and to be making each other laugh, and being in that nice, quiet, comfy setting. It was a great piece of character that felt really refreshing to read, for sure. He can write
For
great
sure.
dialogue.
Rothfuss has, I think one of his attributes is he has patience. He's very willing to just let scenes sit and take their natural course. I think what you were saying about Sanderson's skills, because he's so concerned about not wasting the reader's time.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of that is he can at times hit the bare minimum of what he needs to hit to get the plot moving where it needs to go. And with things like we mentioned certain points in our previous buddy read where we're really glad that Sanderson didn't spend too much time on
Right.
the Belger relationship, but we also see a totally different approach in what Rothfuss is doing, and I think that was a nice juxtaposition for us.
Yes, it was. Very pleasurable experience. I don't know. Patrick just has a way of getting in his characters' heads that it's incredible. It really comes out in the voice and the dialogue. And to frame it all in a story that's told as like someone telling a story is like really, really interesting.
Yeah, well, remember he spends time crafting things as to try to get them perfect, basically. And I think he said he started this book in 1994, if I'm getting that right. It was the mid 90s,
Wow.
and yeah, he's been chipping away at this for a while. And a quote I grabbed was that Kvothe says at some point when he's telling Chronicler, "Look, you're not gonna get a word off from what I say." He tells Chronicler, "Nearly perfect doesn't quite suit me," and I thought maybe that was Rothfuss
A little bit of
speaking
his
through
own voice
Kvothe a
coming
little
out.
bit there. Yeah.
Very likely. But Quoth isn't afraid to be self-deprecating in his story either, which which is a good
Definitely
dimension
not.
to his character. Because sometimes you can forget when a scene is playing that it's being told as a story, and Patrick can kind of weave in Quoth's kind of retrospective. Um, One of these, like, there's so many moments where he like sneaks in these little self-deprecating quips, but one of the ones that I really like is when he just fought that dragon creature, and he was
The
getting
Dracus.
the Dracus, and he was getting healed. And there's a moment where he's like, the local sawbone doctor had patched me up as best he could, and unfamiliar with the thickness of my skull, expressed serious doubts as to whether or not I would ever wake. So he has these moments throughout the whole thing where he's just like, yeah, I was an idiot, or I had a thick skull. It's really clever ways to inject character into these otherwise more exposition-esque parts of the
Yeah.
story.
Well, there's that other quote where he is in that sympathy matchup
Yeah,
and he picks straw, which is a really bad choice. And
I
he
have the
says, I
quote
don't
if you
have the
want me to
quote.
read it.
Oh,
I have it.
yeah, yeah,
Because I
do
have
it.
that moment. Well, so he's describing how a sympathy match, kind of the mechanics of a sympathy match, and he goes, "This involves splitting your mind into two different pieces. One piece tied to hold the alar that your piece of wicking, or straw if you were stupid, was one of the same as the wick of the candle you were trying to light." So he was like, this was a really dumb thing that I was doing. But oh no, I love
Yeah, I
that
love
moment
that.
too. I genuinely chuckled when I read that.
Yeah, there's just so many great
Oh,
moments
when he introduced
throughout that.
Abenthi, he
Mhm.
said, "If not for him, I would never have become the man I am today. I ask that you not hold it against him. He meant well." So,
That's an awesome one, too.
yeah, it's like so he's not afraid to be self-deprecating in the same breath as he gives admiration for his first mentor. He also balances it out by taking a jab at himself.
For sure. It's it's a lot of really good stuff there, Charles. I really want to get into talking about one of the most controversial topics
Let's
in
get into it.
yeah, okay. Something that viewers something that readers are very divided over in this fandom is Denna, Quothe's love interest in this book. And I have been patrolling the the our fantasy subreddits and things like that, and just watching these debates play out. I don't know how much of that you've caught wind of,
I
Charles, but
started
it's
to, but everyone also always loops in Wise Man's Fear in with the
mhm.
discussion. So having not read it, trying to avoid spoilers, I figured you would kind of pioneer the discussion and research on this one, and I would react based on my book one knowledge.
Gotcha. Well, I have a lot of intense thoughts, I think, about, like, I have very strong opinions about Denna and her relationship with Quoth. So you're not gonna hear me being like, I don't get what all the fuss is about, and I
Well, why don't you
I
start
can get
with
into them.
what the controversy
Sure,
is?
I will gladly, and I actually grabbed a quote from Patrick Rothfuss,
Okay.
and he says, some days I feel like Denna is the best character I've ever written because different people feel different ways about her and they can justify their beliefs with passages from the text. Some days I feel like Denna is my greatest failure as an author because I haven't brought her to you as clearly as I sometimes wish to. Some days I just really want a donut. That's Patrick Rothfuss. And I'll get into, I guess, since I have a pretty one-sided opinion on this, I should at least start with trying to get across how both sides feel. I don't know how good a job I'll do on that because of
I'm sure you'll do
my
great.
bias. Thank you, Charles. Well, I think that a lot of readers see Denna as just a not particularly good fit for Quoth. I think they see her as something or someone, well, maybe something that might be part of the problem, but they see her as someone who interrupts the flow of the story, and I think that one comes up a decent amount. They see her as flighty and capricious, I would say,
Okay.
and they just dislike her. And there's many people who would rather that Quoth's main love interest be one of the many other women in this book. I think a lot of people will ship Quoth and Ari. They'll ship Quoth and Fella, and Quoth and Devi. I mean, so I think it's a combination of. I'm just trying to say their points and not what I think, because
Doing great.
yeah, I think those are their main points. Please email or tweet at us or whatever if you have other reasons why you dislike Denna, but those are the main ones I see coming up. And then the the side that likes Denna is the one I'll go on a diatribe about, I guess. So I should I get into that, or do you want to get
Yeah.
out your opinions there,
No. I
Charles?
think I think you're the leader on this discussion, and I would say you're on a roll. So keep it going.
All right. Well, I didn't mean to do this. I wasn't like, oh, I'll prepare something for this, but then ended up, I ended up writing something in my notes anyway that was supposed to be like bullet points of what to hit on, and then I just started ranting to my notes on uh, my iPhone. I
Wow.
think yeah, I think I'll start with just saying, like, I I get choked up. Like, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but it's the truth. I'm sharing it with you in the podcasting world. Like, literally when Denna started to come up again, I start to get choked up. Like, not I wasn't crying, but I was like feeling that kind of feeling you'd get where if something you just need one more push to start crying. And that happened to me multiple times when I started reading about Dennis. So I have like these like strong like feelings
Wow.
that come up with Denna, and I think some of it is I've seen this on a lot of like Reddit type forums when people talk about is like if you've had experiences with people that are kind of like Denna, which I think Charles, you're my longtime friend. I won't get into the details of any of that, but I think you'd attest that I've known a few people with some similar tendencies to Denna.
For sure.
So I think like Denna reminds me of a lot of those experiences that I've had. So I'm really like emotional about it, but I'll say that uh, I I also think that just like rationally from a story point of view, I think she's a well done character. I can get into that now. Uh, I think that when people dislike Denna, I think a lot of it comes from that they're used to the love interest, even if they're coy or whatever. Uh, Especially women, if I'm being honest here, they just come around to like being with the main character and falling at the main character's feet and all of these kind of things. And I think that some readers, whether they realize it or not, kind of think that like Denna owes Kvothe that by nature of being the love interest in his story. And I think that like she isn't really doing much of that. And I think we also know that at another level, from early on in the book in the Frame story, Kvothe is this innkeeper now in a small town, and Denna is nowhere in sight. And based on something that Chronicler says early on, we know she's played some huge role in why things have gone so awry for Kvothe. So I think people are watching this like Denna, like she is flighty or whatnot, right? Like she's not easy to find for Kvothe, and she kind of just like pops up at these more random seeming points. And we kind of, I think people can see Denna's flightiness through this lens of like, all of this is going to be for nothing because they don't, at least at the time the Frame story, as far as we know, they don't seem to like end up happily ever after. So I think people get frustrated by that. I think that they're like, if we're going to go through all of this with Denna, then we deserve or we should get some sort of like thing at the end where they're happy together, and they know they're not going to get that. So I think it's a frustrating process for them to walk through that with Kvothe. And I think that like this point's been brought up before, but I really resonate with it. I think that what people don't see when they see all these characteristics about Denna is that she's basically just like Kvothe. So if we like Kvothe, right, and part of why people don't like Denna is that they like Kvothe and they want him to end up with someone else, right? And they want what's best for him, all this kind of stuff. We like Kvothe. All of these characteristics that Denna has that people get pissed about are the same ones that Kvothe is constantly displaying. And I think that if you actually read this book, I did with an eye to this, almost every time they meet up, Denna finds Kvothe and not vice versa. And we can say maybe she has better luck finding Kvothe or whatnot, but like Kvothe is like just as difficult to track down most of the time. He is, I think people also get bothered by Denna not like not just saying how she feels about Kvothe. Kvothe doesn't say how he feels about Denna. Like they are teenagers, so give them both a break. And then this kind of like dialogue exchange. If they don't like Denna's side of it, like they probably shouldn't like Kvothe's either because he's always engaging in the same thing. I think we're just in Kvothe's point of view, so then we get more of this perspective, like, oh, but Kvothe is looking for Denna all the time. Oh, it's so clear that Kvothe like is trying to be with Denna, but it's like honestly, I think if we it had a neutral point of view, it's more clear that like Denna is trying to like be with Kvothe, and Kvothe being, as he's very willing to say, with all this self-deprecation we've talked about, like he's being an idiot, as many 16-year-old people are. So I think that's my long tirade about Denna. Also, good dialogue, I think. Like I do enjoy it. That's like I really enjoy their dialogue. A lot of these 7 words things. I enjoy the idea of her like wanting to search for meaning, like the 7 words that Quoth told her initially, that she said were the like 7 words to, I think, make a woman fall in love with you, or I I was just wondering why you're here. That's she actually misquotes him when she tells it the second time, which it's hard to know if that was purposeful or not. So I kind of like this idea. She's like, she reveals she almost died as a baby and is kind of just like wondering why she survived, thinking there's got to be some sort of meaning in that. And there's more in Wise Man's Fear, but I won't get into
I appreciate that.
it.
We fall on the same side of this, for lack of a better word, controversy. For me, if I had never searched this book on the internet, I would have never even thought a controversy was possible in this discussion. Just because I found the relationship, many components of the relationship to come from a very honest place, a very relatable place. And like you said, having known you personally for so long, I was reading some of these moments and I was like, oh, no wonder Marsha's obsessed with these books, because I just see so much.
I knew you'd feel that too.
I see so much of you in Kvothe, especially with Denna. And I mean, I've been there too. If anyone's ever like tried to court someone that, especially early on in their life, and that person's getting a lot of male attention and you're not sure where your relationship stands and you're afraid to make moves and you think you're being respectful by not making moves even though there's an opportunity to, it's an act of being like nervous but also being justified by like, oh, I don't want to be another one of those guys. It's like all very relatable, and in the world of fantasy is very kind of unique to read a relationship like this, especially when you know, like you said, she's not with Kvothe at the time of when they're in the inn telling the story, so you know something has happened. But from the perspective of them as teenagers, it's really honest portrayal. And then another thing that we have to consider is that this is Kvothe telling the story from his perspective about their relationship as well, which makes a huge difference. It may seem like Denna just kind of shows up when she shows up, and she's making all these moves, and Kvothe is being kind of nervous, but that's his perspective, and that's a very honest perspective for like a teenage boy to have, especially when they have no experience with women, and then they get entangled with someone like Denna, who is, and we should also make the point that Denna is kind of seeing like dating people or whatever as a way of survival. She doesn't have money, and Kvothe doesn't have money either, and she's looking to get patrons. She's trying to get her own security established, and that's part of what Kvothe sees as her, maybe he's dating that person. Oh, she's in the arms of that man. But Kvothe doesn't know her relationship with a lot of these people, and she's trying to survive as well. And they're both teenagers trying to figure out what to do. Neither one of them seems very skilled in the art of dating. They're having a hard time being honest with each other. I think Patrick writes these great moments where Denna kind of gives Kvothe an in to make a move. And then Kvothe, he does a great job of writing Kvothe as someone who recognizes it, but is like kind of afraid to act on it. So from all of those places, puts me on the side of this relationship is really interesting. And it doesn't have to be like they happen to be two people of the opposite sex in proximity to each other. Let's see if they end up together or not. It's it's just an honest portrayal of a teenage relationship. So I am so far still in it, and the idea of her popping up everywhere, I don't think it derails from the story at all. It's obviously a huge character development for Kvothe that he's trying to figure out because he's such a savant in everything. So it's nice to see him get kind of derailed by these moments with Denna, and it kind of adds a little more roundness to his character, where he's kind of seemingly perfect in so many ways. To see him kind of fumble with women, and not just Denna, but with other women as well, is very interesting. And it's funny to hear Kvothe tell the story. There was one point where he was like, and then I walked away from that encounter and I was like, she was inviting me into her room and she wasn't wearing any clothes. That was really dumb of me. Like, what was I thinking? So it's like those kind of retrospective moments were great, and I think it all comes through this kind of teenage relationship. And you get so many good quotes and descriptions of these moments with Denna. One of my favorite ones is when he's describing Denna and he goes, we stare at a fire because it flickers, because it glows. The light is what catches our eyes, but what makes a man lean close to a fire has nothing to do with its bright shape. What draws you to a fire is the warmth you feel when you come near. The same was true with Denna. So, I mean, beautiful, and moments like that
That's so nice.
make the book worth reading. So we're on the same side of this debate here.
Charles, I'm glad to hear that, because I think I've been stewing in my feeling, as you probably noticed when I just ran off like a freight train when you let me talk about Denna. Like, I've been stewing in my feelings about like Denna and Kvothe's relationship with Denna, and reading these online discussions, and I have been for a long time wondering what you would think of Denna, because I think, I think this is a compliment. I've always admired, Charles, your like stability in relationships. I think I don't know how comfortable you are with that being mentioned on the podcast, but it's not very raunchy. Like, Charles is pretty interpersonally stable, including in romantic relationships, from what I've seen. And
Sure.
I thought maybe someone who's like been so level-headed and all of that, and I thought maybe I would get the other side from you, where like it is that I'm just drawing from all of my experiences that have been kind of reminiscent of this Denna relationship, and
Right.
And maybe even if that was the case, like maybe that would say something about like, hey, if you've had certain experiences, you would feel that way. If you haven't, you hadn't.
For sure.
And that's just subjective art.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would. I bet there's a lot of people out there who can relate to the Denna Kvothe relationship, and
I would think so too.
like even as stable as my interpersonal relationships have been historically. I mean, there's
humble brag.
There's there's certainly Denna moments, especially when you're younger. Like I remember, being like a freshman in college and meeting people and trying to date people and not being totally aware of being nervous to make moves, and like recognizing like, oh, they might be like telling me to like dropping hints to make moves, but I'm afraid to, blah blah blah. And then so yeah, I mean, we've all been there, and I think anyone that can relate to that relationship would find a lot of meaning in it in the story. And I think Patrick Rothfuss did a great job in his descriptions and through the prose and voice of Kvothe, bring that relationship to life, so much so that it strikes a chord with people that have had that shared experience.
Well stated, Charles. And I saw a video where Rothfuss was asked a question that was essentially, who messed you up so bad?
Who hurt you?
Created a character like Denna. and he very intentionally sidestepped it by saying he was going to sidestep it, and then talked for a while about Ari. And then during that, though, he was like, sometimes we assume we know things about authors because of their writing, and we can draw these conclusions that seem logical. And in this case, you are 100% right. But sometimes people are wrong. Which was amazing.
I mean, that's such a. I mean, that voice is so strong in Quoth. Quoth talks like that so much. Also, he's not afraid to like
Yeah.
recognize tropes of things and being like, "Well, it wasn't like that," or "It's totally like that," or that self-deprecation is beautiful, and it doesn't surprise me one bit. I would guess that he's shared these same experiences that we can both relate to as well. It's like he
Mhm.
must have in order to have described it this way. It's a unique story, and compared to the relationships of other fantasy series, like not to bring back Mistborn again, but I would say there's more truth and honesty in the complication of Denna and Quoth's relationship than all of the relationships in Mistborn. But this book is about character and relationships, so that's just kind of what you have to be open to in this book. And if that's not something you enjoy, then there can't be much in this series for you anyway. So
For sure. Well, I'll bring you back to the first part of that Rothfuss quote where he says, "Some days I feel like Denna is the best character I've ever written because different people feel different ways about her and they can justify their beliefs with passages from the text." And I think there's something to be said for Denna and her relationship with Quoth that people feel this strongly about it. And
yeah,
there's a reason, we loved Mistborn, and there's a reason at the same time why Vin and Elend is not gonna bring up that many strong feelings or arguments or anything like
right,
that, because it's such a straightforward playing of the love interest. I
right,
mean, I like we get to see their relationship evolve and all this kind of stuff. They have some turmoil or whatever, but they're both just these people who, at the end of the day, they're always going to choose each other. They're always going to end up
trust in each
together
other.
and trust in each other, even if there's times where it feels like they might not. And with Quoth and Denna, it just feels so real and honest to how relationships go. And
Yeah,
not all the time, but sometimes. And
I think Patrick. I
it's
think
so
that's
good.
such a great quote that you pulled from Patrick because it's completely true. When I was researching this book, even for a review of reviews, so combing through reviews, trying to curate some for the next show,
Yeah.
it's amazing how it's like a best-selling book, one of the best-selling modern fantasy books. It's maybe the or way up there, and the reviews are
Other than Game
incredibly
of Thrones, maybe.
yeah,
Or Song of Ice and Fire books.
and it's incredibly controversial. For every 5-star review, there's a 1-star review, and everyone's and all these reviews are like essays, and it's incredible. I think at some points, like yeah, maybe you're getting a lot of negative reviews, but you've touched all these people in such a way that they're typing up this whole thing, and it's become for me surprisingly controversial. And I think that all stems from Patrick's writing striking chords in people and resonating with people. And some people get it, and some people don't relate to it at all. And it brings out a really interesting discussion. And I think that's a success as a writer to be able to get reactions from people, whether they're strong or negative. And as Patrick said, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just want a donut. So I think you should consider it a success just by all the conversation around it. It's incredible.
I wholeheartedly agree, Charles. And there's another controversial topic that I want to get us into
Let's
that
do it.
I have another tirade about that I think will be shorter. And the but I do want to leave the listeners with check out with the Denna and Kvothe conversations. A lot of their dialogue is they'll say 7-word sentences. So that's a little sort of Easter egg. And the two quotes that I want to make sure I got right because I just said off the top of my head before of the 7 words that Kvothe says to Denna. At first, it's "I was wondering what you're doing here" when they first meet, and then when Denna re-quotes it to Kvothe, it's "I was just wondering why you're here." And it's hard to know was Rothfuss doing something intentional there or not, but it's that's a line that always stuck with me.
He'd probably say something clever like, it's one of those things where it probably is, but I wouldn't put it past me if it wasn't, you know?
Probably. Well, you're capturing Rothfuss's voice there.
It's
well,
easy
Charles,
to do after reading one of his books.
because it's so strong.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. All right, the other big controversy, Charles,
bring us into
is is Kvothe a Mary Sue or a Gary Stew, which is sometimes used to describe men who are showing the features of a Mary Sue. And maybe I'd like to hear your first reactions to this, Charles.
You want me to lead us into this one?
Do you want? I'll get
Sure,
into it too if you prefer.
If you want me to start this one off, I'm happy to share my opinions on it. Because, like, doing the research for review of reviews and all of that, one of the main topping points is like, oh, Kvothe can do everything. He has to perform a song. It's like the most difficult song ever that no one can play, and he didn't practice it, but he goes up and nails it. Or, oh my gosh, this, like, no one can do this. It takes years and years of practice. Oh, I did it in a month. So that happens a lot in this story. So is he a Mary Sue? Like, for me, I can see a lot. I can kind of see that side of the argument very strong. Like, yeah, he's really good at a lot of stuff, everything he tries. So maybe he is, but a part of me thinks, this is a guy telling his own story. So
Yes.
you have to consider his voice. He might be, and he also grew up in a theater troupe raised by performers.
For sure.
So for me, he obviously did some amazing things because they allude to it in the present day in the framing story, which is outside of Kvothe's voice. It's modern day, it's playing out, and these characters hold him with reverence. So he obviously did do something amazing, and we're used to heroes doing amazing things, but what we're not used to is them coming up and being absolutely amazing at everything they try. But I think a lot of that comes from Kvothe's describing himself and trying to move through parts of the story. So he was like, yeah, I mastered this and I did that and I excelled at this. You may have heard of me. He's like, I did all these things. So part of me is like, especially when he's playing for his pipes, you can kind of roll your eye. That for me was kind of like whatever. They made such a big deal about how hard the song was, and then he just crushed it. And I think that was the most damning piece of evidence for him of being a Mary Sue. But it didn't bother me so much because this is a story about a unique guy, and we're hearing it from his voice, so he's going to play it up a bit. And we know that he's not, in the end, something happens where his whole life gets turned upside down. Like, he became a man, so I don't want to say broken, but he's running an inn.
He's waiting to die, Charles. I mean, broken might be hard, but it's a little final. But he's in bad shape.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with setting ambitions aside to run an inn. But waiting to die is
there's literally that's the third silence, right? Of a man waiting to die.
Yeah, so he's obviously not all powerful and all understanding, and he definitely has his faults. Like, even in his own point of view, he's struggling with his relationships with women, and he's rubbing people the wrong way. All of his professors don't like him. So a lot of times when he's talking to other people, he um, rubs them the wrong way, and he definitely one of the things the professor's like, oh, you have to learn patience, or oh, you're too arrogant, or you shouldn't rush this, and all the he's missing all these cues, these social cues with women and things like that. So it does help to round out his character, and the framing device of him being like a shell of his former self also kind of rounds this out. So I think what we're seeing is, from a storyteller's perspective about himself, he's building himself up as this perfect being because he's telling the story of how he came to be his current self, which is like his downfall. So you have to build up this guy to be as high as you can, so that when he does whatever this moment that we don't know yet happens to him,
So
it's going
true,
to be
Charles.
this dramatic, horrible thing that someone who you think has at this point been built up to be infallible, we know doesn't make it. So I think that's the whole point of this story at this point. And we've read a whole book, and that's still the case. We didn't get that payoff like we would get maybe in a more traditional story structure, but it's coming. And I think critics of the story need, like, just don't enjoy that aspect of it. It's like it's a story that's taking its time to be told from the voice of the main character, who may not be the most reliable narrator, who has a flair for theatrics. So
Uh-huh.
I love it, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it's going. So is he a Mary Sue? Probably, but that's kind of the point. Basically, is where I'm going with it, and I enjoy it.
Yeah, hit on some great points there, Charles.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, credit to you for coming in with all of that after one read. Uh, I think I basically just want to echo and maybe slightly build on some of your points that you made there. I think you nailed it with this idea that we already know all of this comes crashing down. If he
Right.
were Mary Sue, everything would work out in the end. That's part of the point with Mary Sue's. And we know this is going to tumble down around him. And I think the more we build him up, the more dramatic that is. It's
Right.
written like a tragedy, this
Mm-hmm.
thing. So I think that's a huge point. I won't get any deeper into that because I think you covered that so well. Then you hit on this idea that he's potentially an unreliable narrator. I tried to weave in as many examples when we were talking about the quotes there
Right.
because I knew I was going to bring this controversy up about what Scarpy says about stories through Quothe's mouth. Um,
Right.
and then all these other times where we get hints that the story that Quoth is telling is exaggerated in a lot of ways. That Denna has a crooked nose, that he says the best lies about him are the ones that he told. When he gets the quote, the bloodless nickname, he talks about how he leans into that. And there's plenty of times where he very explicitly takes action to try to enhance his legend. And I think that there's, and I'll also say that he is only willing to let Chronicler have his story if Quoth gets complete and utter control over the narrative. So,
Yes.
what makes us think that something has changed about this aspect of Quoth where he no longer has a desire to make himself more legendary when he's telling his story in the way that the world is going to hear it? So, I think the entire. Basically, if the story was not within this broader frame story, then I think Quoth is a Mary Sue. I think that if that's bothersome enough to you that you can't enjoy the book then okay, it's not for you. That's
Right.
fine.
Very well said.
But the story is within this larger frame story that is painted as a tragedy. There are all these hints that Kvothe is an unreliable narrator throughout, and I think they're they're not really concealed or subtle. They're right there. And I think when the story is viewed in its entirety, it's not accurate to call Kvothe a Mary Sue.
Very, very well said. I think we're on the exact same page. The important detail is this is told from Quoth's point of view. And you made a great point when you said, if this was being told like the framing device was, as more omniscient, you're seeing what's happening like as facts. Yeah, it would. Like if you're just being told the story of a kid who came up and did all these amazing things, it would be way more obvious. But I think there's a lot to pick up on in terms of Quoth's background as a storyteller and the hints he's dropping throughout that about lying and truths and myths and legends and his own myth. And you hit on so many great points there. I think we crushed it. I hope I think we defended ourselves well, and I think we may have hopefully opened up some minds to the idea that there's a bigger plan in all this.
I hope so too, Charles. I'm so happy to be able to talk through all of this with you, Charles. I'm just glowing over here. I'm also happy. I guess maybe the podcast could potentially benefit from us not being on the same page so much. Like, right? I guess there could be something good in this idea, because I didn't know what you were going to think of any of these things. I thought maybe we'd be going back and forth a little bit with different takes, but I I think that this is part of why we've been such good friends for so long, right? Like
exactly.
we are.
But
we
I
are
think we did a good
of a
job.
like mind here.
Exactly. But I do think you especially do a good job of placating everybody. So I think we did cover all the opinions, and we said, if there's certain things that if they're not for you, it's totally understandable. So I don't think we're coming from a place that's saying that they're wrong. I think there's a great case to be made for all. That's what makes it so controversial, is there's so much to draw from this text, whether you agree with it or not. That makes for a great conversation. And I think it helps that we can both kind of enjoy the same point of view and represent it so well, so that maybe a listener can consider ideas that maybe they hadn't thought of when reading the book for the first time. So, no, I think it was great.
It does make for a great conversation, Charles, and one that you are now a part of, which is which was my number one thing I was pitching for you.
Man, in 2 weeks I'll be able to participate in the whole conversation. I won't have to look out for spoilers anymore.
That's true.
I can go on all the forums and everything.
I'm excited for all of it, and I know that there's many people with opinions about this who maybe would be interested in contacting us or talking to us about some of the things that we've said.
We're more than happy to continue this discussion with the listeners.
And where can they reach us, Charles?
Where can't they reach us? Basically, all of social media, we are the FTF Podcast, except for Twitter, where we are the FTF Podcast 1. You can also email us. That's the digit 1, yes. You can also email us at theftfpodcast@gmail.com. And that's it. You can also find our podcasts in the main places podcasts can be found. There were so many other quotes and things that I would have been happy to share, but I think we have covered the big points today. We've hit our milestone for time. I'm excited for Review of Reviews, and I encourage listeners to check it out, because these reviews are all over the place. They're all over the place. People hating this book and people gushing over this book. So I have a feeling that this Review of Reviews is going to be particularly volatile. So I'm looking forward to getting into that discussion.
I am looking forward to it as well, Charles. It is always a pleasure buddy reading with you.
And I couldn't say it any better myself. It is always a pleasure to be buddy reading with you as well. Be sure to check us out in 2 weeks when we read The Wise Man's Fear, Book 2 of the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. You do not want to miss it. I'm going to go ahead and play us out with the outro. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. Get cracking on that next book because we're going to have a lightning fast conversation about that one in 2 weeks. Be sure to check out Review of Reviews for Name of the Wind, coming out soon. You're not going to want to miss it, folks.
Yeah, we wouldn't want you to miss it.
No, we would hate for you to miss it. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.